The monitors screamed in the sterile hospital room as Angela's blood pressure spiked to dangerous levels. Her vision blurred, her hands trembling as she gripped the bed rails. "Something's wrong," she whispered to the nurse, her voice barely audible over the beeping machines. "I can feel it. This isn't normal." The nurse glanced at the chart, then back at Angela with that familiar dismissive look she'd seen too many times before. "First-time mother nerves," she said, adjusting the IV drip. "You're fine." But Angela wasn't fine. Deep in her gut, she knew something was terribly, catastrophically wrong. What happened next would expose a deadly pattern in American healthcare, one that puts black mothers' lives at risk every single day. But would anyone listen before it was too late? If Angela's story sounds familiar, if you've experienced medical dismissal or know someone who has, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because what you're about to discover will change how you view healthcare forever, and it might just save a life. Angela Martinez had always been the type of person who trusted her instincts. As a third-grade teacher in Houston's inner city, she'd learned to read the subtle signs that something was wrong. The way Timothy's shoulders tensed before a meltdown, how Maria's voice changed when she was hiding something at home. Those same instincts had served her well through 28 years of life, helping her navigate everything from toxic relationships to career decisions. So when she woke up that Tuesday morning in her 34th week of pregnancy and caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror, every alarm bell in her body started ringing. This wasn't the gentle pregnancy glow the magazines promised. Angela's face was grotesquely swollen, her features distorted beyond recognition. Her eyes had nearly disappeared into puffy slits, and when she pressed her finger against her cheek, the indentation remained for several seconds. The woman staring back at her looked like a stranger wearing her skin. She touched her face with trembling fingers, feeling the tight, stretched sensation that made her look like she'd been inflated with a bicycle pump. The headaches had been building for 3 days now, not the occasional pregnancy discomfort she'd read about, but a relentless pounding that felt like someone was taking a sledgehammer to the inside of her skull. The pain radiated from the base of her neck up through her temples, creating a constant rhythm that seemed to sync with her increasingly rapid heartbeat. She'd tried everything: extra sleep, prenatal yoga, the expensive pregnancy pillow Marcus had bought her. Nothing helped. If anything, the pain was getting worse. Angela reached for her phone with shaking hands and dialed her obstetrician's office. She'd been with Dr. Patricia Coleman for 6 months now, ever since her insurance changed and forced her to switch providers. Dr. Coleman seemed competent enough, though Angela had noticed a certain distance in their interactions, a professional politeness that felt more like tolerance than genuine care. "Houston Women's Health. This is Jennifer," came the receptionist's bored voice through the phone. "Hi, this is Angela Martinez. I'm 34 weeks pregnant, and I'm experiencing severe facial swelling and headaches. I need to speak with Dr. Coleman or come in today." Angela kept her voice steady, professional. She'd learned that being too emotional or urgent often backfired with medical staff. There was a pause, the sound of keyboard clicking. "And when did this swelling start?" "It's been gradually increasing over the past few days, but this morning it's much worse. My face is completely distorted, and the headaches are becoming unbearable." Another pause, longer this time. "Well, swelling is completely normal during pregnancy, especially in the 3rd trimester. Have you been drinking enough water? Sometimes dehydration can cause headaches." Angela felt that familiar knot forming in her stomach, the same feeling she got when people dismissed her concerns before really listening. "I've been drinking plenty of water. This isn't normal pregnancy swelling. Something feels really wrong." "I understand you're concerned, but Dr. Coleman's schedule is completely booked today. I can see if she has an opening next week, or you could try drinking more water and elevating your feet. First-time pregnancy anxiety is very common. First-time pregnancy anxiety." The phrase hit Angela like a slap. She'd heard variations of it throughout her pregnancy whenever she'd voiced concerns. Too anxious, too emotional, too dramatic. But Angela had done her research. She'd read every pregnancy book, followed every reputable medical website, and what she was experiencing didn't match any of the normal symptoms described. "I need to be seen today," Angela insisted, her teacher voice coming through, the tone that could make a rowdy classroom fall silent. "This isn't anxiety. This is a medical concern. Ma'am, I understand you're worried, but our medical staff would have told you if there was anything to be concerned about. Try the water and rest, and call us if it gets worse." The line went dead. Angela stared at her phone, feeling a mixture of fury and fear coursing through her veins. In her reflection on the black screen, she could see her distorted face staring back, a visual reminder that her body was sending distress signals that everyone seemed determined to ignore. She thought about her students, how she would never dismiss their concerns so casually. When little Ashley complained about stomach aches every Monday morning, Angela had taken the time to discover the girl was being bullied. When Jerome started falling asleep in class, she'd learned his family was going through an eviction. Why couldn't she get the same basic consideration from her own healthcare providers? But as Angela hung up the phone, she had no idea that her body was already beginning to shut down, and time was running out faster than anyone realized. This dismissive treatment wasn't new for Angela. Throughout her pregnancy, she'd compiled a mental catalog of subtle slights and not-so-subtle dismissals that had become as routine as her prenatal vitamins. During her first appointment, when she'd mentioned family history of high blood pressure, Dr. Coleman had barely looked up from her chart. "We'll monitor it," she'd said. But Angela noticed that her blood pressure readings were often taken hastily, sometimes while she was still talking or settling into the chair. When Angela reported unusual fatigue that went beyond normal, pregnancy tiredness, the kind that left her unable to climb a flight of stairs without gasping, she was told to take it easy and remember that growing a baby is hard work. When she mentioned persistent nausea that extended well beyond the first trimester, she was advised to try crackers and ginger ale. Each concern was met with the same patronizing patience, reserved for children who insisted monsters lived under their beds. Angela had started keeping a detailed symptom journal. After the fourth appointment, where her concerns were brushed aside, she documented everything: sleep patterns, blood pressure readings she took at home, unusual symptoms, dietary changes, exercise levels. She printed out medical articles from reputable sources, highlighted relevant passages, and brought them to appointments in an organized folder. Still, Dr. Coleman would glance at her carefully prepared documentation with barely concealed irritation. "You can't diagnose yourself from the internet, Angela," Dr. Coleman had said during their last appointment, not bothering to look at the peer-reviewed research Angela had brought. "That's what medical school is for." But Angela's internet research had uncovered statistics that made her blood run cold. Black women in America are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than white women. The same symptoms that send white women straight to emergency intervention are routinely dismissed when reported by black women. Pain levels reported by black patients are consistently underestimated by medical professionals. The data painted a clear picture of systemic bias that Angela recognized from her own experiences. She'd shared these statistics with Marcus, her husband of 3 years, during one of their late-night conversations about her growing frustration with her medical care. Marcus, who worked as a paramedic for Houston's emergency services, had initially tried to reassure her that she was overthinking things. "Baby, Dr. Coleman went to medical school. She knows what she's doing," he'd said, rubbing Angela's swollen feet as they lay in bed. "But what if she doesn't?" Angela had responded. "What if her training included the same biases that created these statistics?" Marcus had gone quiet then, and Angela knew he was thinking about his own experiences as a black paramedic. The way some patients requested different paramedics when he arrived at their homes. The way some emergency room staff questioned his competence despite his years of experience and impeccable record. The healthcare system wasn't immune to the same prejudices that infected every other aspect of American society. Angela had also researched the specific symptoms she was experiencing. Sudden onset facial swelling combined with severe headaches in the third trimester could indicate preeclampsia, a potentially deadly condition that required immediate medical intervention. Left untreated, preeclampsia could progress to eclampsia, causing seizures, organ failure, and death for both mother and child. The condition disproportionately affected Black women and was more likely to be missed or misdiagnosed in Black patients. She'd printed out information about preeclampsia, highlighted the symptoms that matched her experience, and planned to bring it to her next appointment. But that appointment wasn't for another week, and her symptoms were worsening daily. By Wednesday morning, Angela could barely open her eyes. The swelling had spread down her neck, and her hands looked like inflated rubber gloves. She couldn't get her wedding ring off her finger. The headaches had evolved into something that felt like her skull was being compressed in a vice, accompanied by flashing lights at the edges of her vision that made it difficult to focus on anything. She called the doctor's office again. "Houston Women's Health. This is Jennifer. This is Angela Martinez again. My symptoms have gotten much worse overnight. I can barely see, and the headaches are severe. I need to be seen immediately. Hold on." The typing sound again, longer pauses. "Dr. Coleman reviewed your call from yesterday and wanted me to tell you that swelling and headaches are normal pregnancy symptoms. She recommends you reduce your salt intake and try prenatal yoga." Angela felt something break inside her chest. Reduce her salt intake, as if she were some stereotypical patient who didn't understand basic nutrition, as if her carefully documented symptoms were just the complaints of an anxious Black woman who couldn't handle pregnancy. "I need to speak with Dr. Coleman directly," Angela said, her voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "She's with patients all day, but I can have her call you back." "When?" "When she has time." Angela hung up and stared at her reflection in her phone screen again. The woman looking back at her was unrecognizable, and not just because of the swelling. There was something in her eyes, a desperation that scared her more than the physical symptoms. She had no way of knowing that while she waited for a call back that would never come, her blood pressure was silently climbing toward stroke levels, and her baby's life was hanging in the balance. By Thursday morning, Angela knew she was dying. The realization came not as a dramatic epiphany, but as a quiet certainty that settled into her bones like ice water. She'd woken up on the bathroom floor with no memory of how she'd gotten there, her vision so blurred that the tiles beneath her face looked like abstract art. When she tried to stand, her legs buckled, and she had to crawl back to the bedroom where Marcus was getting dressed for his early shift. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice so slurred that she barely recognized it as her own. "Something's really wrong." He turned around and dropped his uniform shirt. The color drained from his face as he took in her appearance, the grotesque swelling that had now consumed her entire head and neck, the way she struggled to keep her eyes open, the tremor in her hands that hadn't been there the day before. "We're going to the hospital." "Now," he said, already reaching for his keys. The 20-minute drive to Houston Methodist felt like hours. Angela drifted in and out of consciousness in the passenger seat, vaguely aware of Marcus on the phone with dispatch, calling in sick for his shift. Through the fog of her deteriorating condition, she caught fragments of his conversation. "My wife. Emergency. Can't wait for an appointment." But even Marcus, with his years of emergency medical training, couldn't have predicted what would happen when they arrived at the hospital. The emergency room was exactly what Angela had expected. Harsh fluorescent lights, the smell of disinfectant mixed with fear and desperation, and the controlled chaos of medical staff moving between curtained areas. What she hadn't expected was for her symptoms to be minimized even here, even with her condition visibly deteriorating. "Name and date of birth," the triage nurse said, without looking up from her computer screen. "Angela Martinez." "March 15th, 1995, Marcus answered when Angela couldn't form the words clearly. "What brings you in today?" "My wife is 34 weeks pregnant and experiencing severe preeclampsia symptoms," Marcus said, his paramedic training evident in his clear clinical description. Severe facial and extremity edema, altered mental status, visual disturbances, and severe headache. Her blood pressure at home this morning was 160/110. The nurse finally looked up, her eyes scanning Angela with the practiced assessment of someone who'd seen everything. But instead of the urgency Marcus expected, her expression showed something closer to annoyance. "Swelling is normal in pregnancy," she said, her tone suggesting she'd had this conversation many times before. "First baby?" "This isn't normal pregnancy swelling," Marcus insisted. "I'm a paramedic. I know what preeclampsia looks like." "I'm sure you do, but the doctors will need to evaluate her. Please have a seat in the waiting area." Angela tried to speak, to explain that she'd been trying to get medical attention for days, but the words came out as an incoherent mumble. She watched the nurse's face change subtly, saw the flash of judgment that she'd become all too familiar with. Dramatic, anxious, probably drug-seeking. They waited for 2 hours. During that time, Angela's condition continued to deteriorate. She couldn't keep her head up consistently, and her reflexes had become hyperactive, her knee jerking violently when Marcus tested it, a sign he recognized as dangerously elevated from his medical training. Other patients who'd arrived after them were called back first. A woman with a minor cut on her hand, a man with chest pain who turned out to have indigestion, a teenager with a possible broken wrist from skateboarding. When they finally called Angela's name, she could barely walk. Marcus had to support most of her weight as they made their way to the examination room, where they waited another 45 minutes for a doctor to appear. Dr. Richard Hayes was a young resident with the confidence of someone who'd recently graduated medical school and believed his education had prepared him for everything. He looked at Angela's chart with the same dismissive glance she'd grown accustomed to, then performed a cursory examination. "Blood pressure is elevated, but not dangerously so," he said, apparently missing the reading of 170/115 that had just appeared on the monitor. "The swelling looks like normal third trimester edema. Are you drinking enough water?" Marcus stepped forward. "Doctor, I'm a certified paramedic with 8 years of experience. My wife is showing classic signs of severe preeclampsia progression. Her blood pressure has been climbing steadily, she has significant proteinuria, and her reflexes are hyperactive. She needs immediate intervention." Dr. Hayes looked at Marcus with barely concealed irritation. "Sir, I understand you're concerned about your wife, but I'm the doctor here. Anxiety and stress can cause many of these symptoms, and first-time mothers often experience heightened worry during pregnancy. Anxiety, stress, first-time mother worry, the same phrases that had been used to dismiss Angela's concerns for weeks. But now, with her body shutting down in real time, those words felt like a death sentence. "Please," Angela managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. "Something's wrong. Please listen." Dr. Hayes checked his watch. "I'm going to order some basic lab work to ease your minds, but I suspect everything will come back normal. In the meantime, try to stay calm. Stress isn't good for the baby." As he left the room, Angela felt Marcus's hand tighten around hers. Through her blurred vision, she could see the fury and fear warring in his expression. But neither of them realized that Angela's blood pressure had just spiked to 180/120, stroke territory, and that the baby's heart rate was beginning to show signs of distress. The lab results took another hour to come back. During that time, Angela slipped further away from consciousness, her responses becoming increasingly incoherent. Marcus watched the monitors with growing alarm, his paramedic training allowing him to read the subtle signs that the hospital staff seemed determined to ignore. When Dr. Hayes finally returned, his expression had changed. The casual dismissiveness had been replaced by something closer to concern, though he still seemed reluctant to admit the severity of the situation. "Your protein levels are elevated," he said, reading from the lab report, "and your blood pressure is higher than we'd like to see. We're going to admit you for observation." Observation. Not treatment, not emergency intervention. Observation. "Doctor," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled frustration, "my wife needs immediate treatment for severe preeclampsia. Her blood pressure is approaching crisis levels, and she's showing signs of progression toward eclampsia. We need magnesium sulfate, antihypertensive medication, and fetal monitoring. Now." Dr. Hayes looked up from the chart, his expression shifting to something that Marcus recognized all too well, the look of someone who was being challenged by a person they didn't consider their equal. "Sir, I need you to calm down. We know how to treat our patients." But as the words left his mouth, Angela began to seize. The grand mal seizure lasted 43 seconds. Marcus counted every one of them as he watched his wife's body convulse on the hospital bed, while alarms screamed around them. Suddenly, the room filled with medical staff. The same nurses who had dismissed Angela's symptoms an hour earlier were now working frantically to stabilize her, pushing medications that should have been started hours ago. "Get me magnesium sulfate, stat," Dr. Hayes shouted, his earlier confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. "And call obstetrics for an emergency consult." The transformation was instantaneous and horrifying. The same symptoms that had been dismissed as normal pregnancy concerns were now being treated as the medical emergency they had always been. Angela's blood pressure had reached 185, 125. Protein was spilling into her urine at dangerous levels. The baby's heart rate was showing signs of severe distress. Dr. Sarah Chen, the obstetrics attending, arrived within minutes and took one look at Angela's condition before ordering immediate preparation for emergency delivery. "How long has she been symptomatic?" Dr. Chen asked, reviewing the chart with growing alarm. "She's been trying to get medical attention for 4 days," Marcus answered, his voice heavy with exhaustion and rage. Every time she called, she was told it was normal pregnancy symptoms. Dr. Chen's expression darkened. 4 days? With these symptoms? She turned to the nursing staff. "We need to move to OR immediately. This baby needs to be delivered now." As they wheeled Angela toward the operating room, Marcus walked alongside the gurney, holding her hand while she drifted in and out of consciousness. The magnesium sulfate had stopped the seizures, but her blood pressure remained dangerously high, and the baby's distress was becoming more pronounced with each contraction. "Is she going to be okay?" Marcus asked Dr. Chen as they reached the OR doors. Dr. Chen paused, her expression serious but not without hope. "We caught it in time, but barely. Another few hours." She didn't finish the sentence, but Marcus understood. Another few hours of observation and normal pregnancy symptoms, and he might have lost both his wife and daughter. But as the OR doors closed behind Angela's gurney, the real cost of medical dismissal was only beginning to become clear. Inside the operating room, Angela's condition continued to deteriorate despite treatment. Her blood pressure spiked to 190/130, putting her at immediate risk for stroke. The baby's heart rate dropped to dangerous levels, indicating severe fetal distress from the prolonged exposure to Angela's hypertensive crisis. Dr. Chen worked quickly, knowing that every minute of delay increased the risk of permanent complications for both mother and child. The emergency cesarean section revealed a baby girl, tiny, premature, but alive. Isabella Martinez entered the world 6 weeks early, her lungs underdeveloped, her body struggling to adapt to life outside the womb. Angela remained unconscious throughout the delivery, her body fighting to stabilize as medications worked to bring her blood pressure back to safe levels. The preeclampsia had progressed further than anyone had realized, affecting her liver, kidneys, and cardiovascular system. What should have been a manageable condition with early intervention had become a life-threatening crisis because her warnings had been systematically ignored. In the NICU, Isabella fought for every breath, her tiny chest rising and falling with the assistance of machines. Born at 34 weeks, she weighed just 4 pounds, 2 ounces, smaller than she should have been due to the prolonged exposure to her mother's hypertensive condition. Marcus stood between 2 hospital rooms, one where his wife lay unconscious, recovering from a condition that nearly killed her, and another where his daughter struggled to survive complications that could have been prevented with earlier medical intervention. But this story was far from over. What Angela would discover when she finally woke up would transform her from a dismissed patient into a fierce advocate, and her fight was just beginning.